to design and configure for accessibility. And there's a lot of accessibility features already built into Power BI Desktop. For example, maybe you can't use the mouse, well, you can use the keyboard. And if you want to know a list of common keyboard controls, then just type in a question mark. And here you can see various actions that you can use the keyboard for. Now, you've also got accessibility when you're looking at Windows accessibility. For instance, maybe you've got a high contrast color view set in Windows. If you can't see visualizations clearly, then if you press Alt and Shift and F11, you get into a table view. Now, this table view is similar to the table view as shows the table, but this is better formatted for screen readers. So that's some of the ways in which it is already accessible, Power BI. But there are some ways you need to add. For example, how can this be best seen by somebody who's blind? Obviously, they can't see it, they can't see all of the contours, they don't know what it's all about. Well, if you go into the Format pane and into Properties, then just like with the internet, there is an Alt Text section. And as you can see, this is a description which will be read by a screen reader when they select the visual. So they'll have some information about it. So this is all about the sales volume change. Now, to move between visuals, you can use the Tab button on your keyboard. And to go backwards, you can use Shift and Tab. But what are the order of these visualizations? Suppose I reduce the width of this visualization and put a filter on. And in that filter, I'll put region name. And I want to be able to tab between the two or allow somebody else to do that. Well, if I go to View, Selection, there is a tab order. And you can see the various orders. And now when I click on the first one, I click on Tab, I now go between these two selections, these two different visualizations. So what? Well, suppose there was a third visualization. So again, I'll put on another filter, which is going to be for area. So now I'll go between them, but am I going between them in the right order? I'm only going between these two at the moment. So if I go back to Selection and Tab Order, then it can regenerate the tab order, but it's now going the wrong way. So I'm going to move this one all the way to the top. So we start off with this one, and then I want this slicer next, and then that slicer. So this allows for a good user experience, even if you're not using the mouse. So there are other things that you can do. For instance, suppose you wanted a theme that was colorblind safe or high contrast. You can do that by going into View Themes. Maybe you have a line graph where you are plotting two different lines on top of each other. So let's just create a line graph, and we're going to plot over time. We're going to do the average semi-detached price and the average terraced price. So make sure that these are averages. So yes, these are similar colors. They probably will be visible to people with certain color blindness, but maybe we can do something in addition to that. Maybe we can add markers on these lines. So if we go to Shapes and Show Marker, so here are our markers, but then we can customize them so that there are different markers for the different lines. So maybe we will have this being a shape and a fairly big shape, whereas these are small circles, for instance. A lot of other things are just potentially good design for reports. For instance, maybe have a background to distinguish various sections. Have contrasting colours. Don't clutter the place up if you don't need to. Maybe have consistency between the different pages. Maybe use tooltips only when necessary. In other words, if you've got important information, don't hide it away on tooltips, because some people might not be able to use the mouse easily to access those. On the other hand, if you're putting too much information on the page, maybe hide some away in the tooltips if they're not quite necessary. So most of this advice is to do with general design of reports and knowing that people have got particular color blindness. Find out what your needs are of your users. So two things that could definitely help is if you go into the Format pane, Properties, and add some alt text, and if you go into View, Selection, and Tab Order, and make sure that all of your visualizations are in the logical order so that when you press Tab, then you will be able to go from one to another naturally. And then you might also want to have a look at the various themes and see whether one of them is right for you.